Hi, folks. This is Jack Spirko with another edition of the Survival Podcast. As always, one man's view of the changing world, the changing times, and the things that we can all do to live a better life if times get tough or even if they don't. Today is Wednesday, March the 27th, 2019. This is episode 2409 of the Survival Podcast. 2409. It is Wednesday. That means it is interview day. And we have a guy coming on named Daniel Allen to talk to us about Aircrete. Have you heard of Aircrete? I've heard of Aircrete, but I've never really dug deep into the subject. Here's what our guest says. Including furniture, you can build a home off-grid, finished with appliances for about $38 a square foot. That's pretty solid right there, guys, if you can do it. In fact, he says that if you make minimum wage, but you're willing to tough it out for a year or two, camping on land that you buy for as cheap as you can get, that anybody in 1 to 2 years can have a land, car, and a home paid for as part of that thing we call lifestyle design, true freedom. He describes it as living the life you want now versus the life you want someday. I'm all about that. And I'm all about learning new things. So learning about Aircrete is going to be interesting. Aircrete is homemade cellular cement, and it has great structural and insulation properties. When you make Aircrete, the cement is inflated to 6 times its volume with air bubbles. This makes it lightweight, but it also makes it go further. But it's something you got to get just right. We're going to be talking about today with our guest, again, Daniel Allen, in just a bit. And he has a website called tinygiantlife.biz. You're going to want to check it out. He does workshops on this. If you can get out to the Tyler, Texas area, you can actually do on-site workshops. And he's got video courses as well. We'll have him on in just a moment. Before we do, let's hear from our 2 sponsors. With that, let's go ahead and introduce our special guest again, Daniel Allen. He's going to talk to us about Aircrete today, building off-grid. He's going to talk about some other cool stuff like, building a subsistence diet of calories on apples. Spindle apples. Is that possible? It might just be. We're going to talk about all of that and more right now with our special guest, Daniel Allen. With that, hey, Daniel, man, welcome to the Survival Podcast.
Thank you, Jack.
Hey, I'm glad to have you on, man. We're going to be talking about Aircrete today, and I've kind of renewed my hobby recently of looking at remote properties and things like that, looking for another property since we don't have one anymore. And I think this is a really great topic because the first thing you think is, how do I put a structure on there? So we're going to talk about that, whether it be a remote property, whether it be a lifestyle design choice to reduce your cost of living. I think it's awesome. But before we do that, how did you get to where you are now, where this is like what you do? I know your history's pretty long from your bio, but kind of tell people how did you get started professionally in life, and how did it lead you here?
Well, as you say, I had a very crooked path getting here. Raised by government school, doing all the usual things that everyone else does, working jobs. But when I was getting tired of the rat race, I just happened to find your podcast. And, of course, that started filling my head with ideas, and I started looking at various alternatives. But then life took the usual turn. I moved back home, took an IT job, found love, all the usual things. But that company wound up being outsourced. They outsourced my job because Exxon had purchased the company, which was the primary client for my company. And in a matter of weeks, that literally left me jobless. And, of course, that was my own personal disaster, as one might say. So this was during the Great Recession, if you will, and so jobs were very hard to find at that time. And so basically what happened is I got really in a bind, and I cashed out my little retirement, and we paid for a little piece of land, and we got started. And I just committed to growing all my own food, and we built a little tiny house. We planted 400 trees on swales. We got goats and cows, and we had a tornado come by reasonably close to us, which really just ruined the roof on the house and made the walls start to have mildew. And I started looking for alternative methods of building. About that time, there was a number of people who were getting me more and more interested in alternative building. So I started attending various workshops on alternative methods of building, like rammed earth and earth ships and cob and earth bags, straw bales. And ultimately what I found with all of that was that it's not only more expensive than conventional building, but it takes a great deal of work and effort to move that much material. And in the case of straw, it's just not really available in our area. So I began to contract a little bit. I got my AC license and moved back into more conventional lifestyle. But ultimately that has proven to be, not ideal, not the perfect life that I would choose to design for myself. So I discovered Aircrete while researching, and I went and attended several out-of-the-country workshops, and I really fell in love with the idea because it's such a beautiful, craftable material. It insulates, it provides structure, and it's something that I can throw in the back of my truck, and anywhere I can drive to, I can quickly put up a shelter, but not just any shelter, but a nice shelter. So looking at bug out locations and whatnot, it made sense to have a structure that also wouldn't be destroyed by pests, while you're away.
Storms or, because what you're saying there, like when you start talking about these other alternative building methods, some of them I know people get really attached to the idea, and I'm just like, they're not practical. One of the ones that I was thinking of when you were mentioning these other options there is, the airship built out of tires. I'm sorry, I've seen way too many people in their 8th year still ramming dirt into a tire. And you could say I can get the tires for free and the dirt for free or whatever. Like, your time is not free, right?
No,
I mean, if you take 15 years to build a house, you could have bought a lot of houses in that time. I'm just saying.
Exactly. And having done all of that, it's incredibly discouraging, the amount of labor and then the physical pains. And not only that, who wants to gather up all this trash to make your house out of? I mean, that's not exactly easy either.
Yeah, there is a question too. I mean, I try not to be like a anti-tire Nazi because I see uses for used tires and all, but I don't know that I really want to be working with tires for 15 years to build a house and breathing tire dust. I just don't necessarily think that is a really good idea. Let's talk about Aircrete then. What exactly is Aircrete?
Okay, Aircrete is basically Portland cement that has been inflated 6 times in volume. So you start with one bag of Portland cement and it becomes 6 cubic feet of an aerated insulating cement product. And that's it in a nutshell. It's structural. It's something that you can build out of. A lot of people have built domes out of them. There's a certain crowd that really likes the dome shape. And, of course, domes, being a compressive structure, are very strong. It's like a continuous arch. So, but certainly you don't have to build only domes. We're actually developing a little getaway cabin that one person can put together in just 2 weeks. And like I said, because it's so portable, it makes it very practical and very comfortable to be in because of the insulating value that is entrained. It's actually the air that creates the insulation. And, the term Aircrete is kind of the do-it-yourself version of what the industry knows as cellular cement. Only instead of using chemical additives, we basically take soap and water and we make bubbles and we entrain that into the cement. And those thousands and millions of microscopic bubbles are what forms the insulation in this cement.
So how do you actually make it? Like, I know you can't completely lay out everything. It's something it's very visual, but how do you get that much air into the concrete?
Well, we have a mixture of soap and water, and we have a pump, and we have an air compressor. So these two are mixed together in a line, and it goes through a wand that is packed full of a fine stainless steel wool. And it's just like those little bubble wands you had as a kid. When you blow air through soap and water, it creates a little bubble. But because there's millions of pores in this structure, you're creating a very thick, it's almost like shaving cream. It's a very thick foam. And this foam is injected into the bottom of a mixture of water and Portland cement. And then you just simply use a drill and you just mix it and it will become entrained. It's actually the viscosity of the cement itself that entrains the bubble. So the soap is only a temporary way to get the bubbles into the cement.
So is that highly specialized equipment, or is this, it basically sounds like stuff you could get at any Home Depot or Lowe's?
Oh, absolutely. It is just exactly that. You can use a mixing barrel with casters bolted to the side so you can take the labor off your back. You just use a standard drill that's 8 amps or more, an air compressor that can deliver, preferably 4 to 5 cubic feet at 90 psi. This is all off-the-shelf stuff. It's nothing complex or complicated whatsoever, and that's what is so great. It's something that everybody can get their hands on, everybody can try, and people even make yard art or privacy walls out of it. It has other uses too besides just structures.
Gotcha. So, what is the cost of building with this material?
Well, when you talk about building, the most expensive aspect is usually the finishing. So the shell itself, you put down the foundation and the shell of a dome, for example. And if you buy a pallet of Portland cement somewhere like Lowe's, who will actually give you a discount for buying in bulk, then you wind up with the shell between $7 and $9 per square foot for your shell. And it's the finishing of that structure that will more than double that price from there, depending on what you're putting into it. If you're just wanting a simple hunting cabin or, a storage shed or a studio, that's one thing. If you're talking about building a house, then, appliances, flooring, cabinetry, all of those other things go into that, and that price expands exponentially depending on how much of that you hire out for someone else to do.
Sure. I mean, and how do you deal with things like wiring, plumbing, etc., with something when you're talking about like a solid wall, basically?
Well, there's two approaches I should say 3 approaches. One is to put the plugs and everything into conduit in the flooring that's poured into the foundation in advance and build the remainder into the interior walls. Because this is also a very workable material, you can take a router, however, and you can just route down through the wall and make a path to embed conduits and wires into the structure, and then you seal it up with cement.
Huh.
And then the third option is, of course, if you could cast a structure instead of stacking blocks, then you can actually put all your conduits, your boxes, everything in place before you start, and you simply pour around it.
Sure. And that would be obviously ideal if you can pull that off with the structure you're building.
Yes.
So why would people choose to build with Aircrete over, I can put together sticks and bricks pretty quick. So what is the big advantage of Aircrete?
Well, we talk about R value with insulation. You talk about the cost of ownership of a structure over time. And with Aircrete, you don't have moisture and air infiltration that actually decreases your insulating value. So you have a structure that is very easy to heat and very easy to cool. So you have a savings in the cost of ownership. But beyond that, if you actually compare the cost of fiberglass insulation to Aircrete, the Aircrete cost almost exactly the same as just the fiberglass insulation. However, it's not only insulation, it's structure. So you also have a component of being able to build your structure very fast and very affordably.
So you live in Texas. I live in Texas. We do have the summer. We also call it temporary hell. How good is this stuff at that insulative properties? I mean, you're talking about going off grid here, and to me, I've always said one of the difficulties going off grid in Texas is not dying of heat exhaustion in the summertime. So, how good is it at that aspect of things?
Well, it's actually very good. The R value, unofficially comes out around 2.8 to 3 R per inch, which is similar to conventional construction. However, in actual tests where we build a vessel of a 4.5-inch thick block of Aircrete and we fill it with boiling water, and we measure the temperature change in that water over an hour. So based on the pounds of water, we know exactly how many BTUs of heat are leaving through this material. And it winds up being somewhere around 2.6 BTUs per square foot of wall. And when you compare that figure to a conventional, say, 2x4 house of a normal stick box house, it's actually using half the energy of a, quote, conventional 2x4 frame house.
It's pretty amazing. So do you have any of these finished in Texas that, you can say, hey, I go in there in June and I don't die?
Well, I'm working on mine right now, and we're teaching workshops, and so being that I'm trying to transition into starting my own business, I have not finished that project intentionally because we started it last fall, and of course, building this during freezing or cool weather is a slower process because it chemically cures slower.
Okay.
But now that spring is here, we'll be starting workshops and finishing that. So we should have 2 structures finished this year, a dome and a rapid build cylinder house that is actually going to be a bug out / vacation location out in the far West Texas environment.
And as far as affordability, how would you classify it as a structure for like a bug out location?
Well, if you're looking for something quick and easy and you're not going to do much, literally you can travel out on a 2-week time period, or I suppose you could do it over time on multiple trips, but you could put up the foundation and the walls of a structure like this in just 6 days. And, you're looking at just, like I said before, let's round up, say $9 a square foot to finish the shell. And because if you're talking about a bug out location, you're not necessarily immediately worried about it looking perfect. So you can literally use it at that point at the end of 2 weeks. You can literally start moving into it. And so it's incredibly practical. So that to me is also a great value to have something that is quickly available. I've actually talked to a lot of people who are looking for an option because, the hurricane has destroyed their house. And there's still people I've talked to that are recovering from the floods in Louisiana. So, and New Orleans. So they really like the idea of getting out of the FEMA, poison trailer and into something that's, quick and easy and something that's affordable. And when you look at a conventional structure, you've got all your conventional tools and materials. In this particular location where we're building, it's 76 miles from the nearest town. And so you've got to account for every screw, every nail, every piece of material that's going out there. The logistics of it can be a bit of a nightmare. But with Aircrete and an online calculator we have, you can just throw bags of cement on a trailer. And, of course, you'll need water, but anything besides that is really optional. It's such an easy building structure. Once you have your tools and your material, you just go and you put it up.
Gotcha. So where can these be built? Like, you've got building restrictions, and then you were mentioning kind of being really remote and having to haul materials. And what do you need on site to be able to make this work?
Yeah, you need a generator, you need an air compressor, you need an 8-amp or greater drill, a 32-inch mixer, and your little foam machine, which consists of a little pressure washing pump and a air regulator and a barrel with hinges, and then you need some wood to build a form out of if you're making bricks or to build a form to cast it in.
Okay, and I guess the biggest thing you need is water.
Yeah, you need water. For each 6 cubic feet of material you're going to make, you're going to require 10 gallons of water. And so, in the case of our bug out location, we actually went out there last year and put up a water catchment and a tank. So the water is now on site. And this is a location that doesn't have the option for drilling a well because there's not an aquifer underneath this. And so, it's about taking the uniqueness of your location and working according to that because, water catchment is certainly easier and cheaper than drilling a well in most locations.
So now we've talked about using it as a bug out location, but we've also talked about using it as a house, place to live, a dwelling. One of the things you said in your show notes prep for me was that a person who really wants it, even if they're on minimum wage, could end up with land, a house, and a car in 1 to 2 years. So how long does it really take to build a starter house? Something a person not only could live in, because you could live in a box, right? But would actually want to live in.
Right. Okay. So let's take an example of a 1-bedroom dome because I have the numbers in front of me here. Let's make it 24 feet, which gives you enough room for a living space, a small kitchen, a bedroom, a bathroom, and a small walk-in closet. It's about 425 square feet. And the cost of this structure for more or less getting it ready to put cabinets in and to move into would be around $6,800 based on, current big box store prices for materials. And that's only $13.85 per square foot. So, you can make that if you're a disciplined person reasonably quickly. Somebody who's working, say 38 hour a week at minimum wage, you can pull in $200 you can put in your pocket pretty quick each week. So you see that it becomes possible to put up a shell of something like this very quickly. Now, I'm a big fan of not continuing to pay a rent or something. You might consider putting up something in the terms of a quick and easy structure, something smaller, something you can complete as a temporary shelter that gets you out of paying the rent, gets you out of potentially paying a mortgage very quickly. So when you look at a small structure like that, that's nothing more than a bedroom and a bathroom, you could almost call it a yurt. Then you're looking at $1,462 to put something like that up. Okay. And so that's where this lends itself to a unique opportunity, if you will, to build something small and quick and get on your land right away. And that gives you the ability to then expand more quickly as less of your money is going out to other expenses.
Makes sense. The other time limitation here, though, is actually just temporal. Like, how much man hours does it take to make this thing happen? Like I said, I've seen the people, we're building our airship in like 8.5 years and they're pounding a tire, right? So, like, if a person was going to build something, you go back to your 24-foot one, the actual kind of one-bedroom house, what type of number of man hours are they looking at on the labor to get the shell done?
Okay. I can give you an example based on actual experience because we've built these in Mexico, and we've built one in California now, as a quote storage said. And a 24-foot dome is something that once you have your tools and your process laid out and you actually get rolling with this thing, it can take one person 14 days to finish the shell. Okay. Now, what that looks like is coming out each morning, you've got to break down your molds and remove all of your blocks and cut them to size. And so you're looking at somewhere in the neighborhood of say 2.5 hours to break that out, clean your mold, put it back together, and then mix more Aircrete and fill it. Okay. Now, with those blocks, you then spend probably, it depends on how quickly you work and how much you're willing to do in a day, but say you spend another 5 hours that day stacking those blocks. You're up to 7.5 hours and you've completed one course of blocks. And these blocks being roughly a foot in height, and in the case of a 24-foot dome, that we actually raise the equator up off of the ground by 2 feet so that you don't bump your head into the side of the structure when you walk up to put your shoes on. And that means you now have a height of about 14 feet. Well, that's only 2 weeks of work. If you stick with this and you can consistently put 7.5, 8 hours a day of work in, then yes, you can get this done in 2 weeks with one person.
With one person, and obviously 2 people would move maybe not twice as fast, but faster. And you're probably still looking at 14 days because you're cutting your hours, but you still have curing time.
Well, it's interesting. In the case of stacking a dome, you can make as many blocks as you can make molds for, and as many people as you can get mixing those. So you could conceivably, if you really wanted to take it to the extreme, have one massive day where everybody comes out and mixes all the blocks for the whole structure and fills up a large form. Not realistic necessarily, but it just shows you that the labor can be divided. And after the blocks have cured 24 hours, even though they're not full strength, if you can pick them up without cracking them, then you can actually begin to build with them. So you can literally pull them straight out of the mold and build with them. Now, because these are homemade, and I should make that distinction too. You know, the industrial version of autoclaved aerated cement is cured with steam. The homemade block takes 28 days to come up to full strength.
Okay.
So while you can build with them right away, and honestly, they're more than strong enough. We have 3 and 4 people walking on top of these, even though the Aircrete's only 3 and 4 days old. So it's really not an issue at all with the strength in that early time. It's just kind of adapting and being intentional to handle things carefully so you don't, break a green block.
Got you. So you've been talking about blocks. So we have these blocks. I guess then they are fitted together, and then are you using more Aircrete on top of them? Like, how are they mortared together? I mean, how does that work?
Yes, they're mortared together with an additional mix of Aircrete, but it has a cement bonding agent added to it, so it really grabs a hold of all the blocks really good. And this is a point of it's a little bit of a point of contention whenever you're teaching people to do this, and you've got to really watch this. A lot of people want to stick rock and bricks together, so they keep adding more and more cement to the mortar and making it thicker and stickier, which this is not brick mortar. This is Aircrete mortar. It's actually pretty thin. So when in the case of building a dome where you actually have to tilt the blocks, you actually put wedges of finished Aircrete or cut blocks into the spaces to prevent the block from settling back and smashing that thin Aircrete mortar out. And it cures with the same consistency then of the block itself and an insulative property, because you don't want a hard, rigid mortar next to a softer insulating Aircrete block, because in theory, as the structure heats and expands and then cools and contracts, it could eventually cause cracking throughout the structure.
So can you kind of summarize then the advantages of building with this system and how it maybe fits into something we talk about all the time here on TSP, which is lifestyle design?
Well, you can build houses with one caveat, and that is that the homemade version of this is not code approved. And so, getting that approved means getting a variance with your building inspector if you have to take that route. And that is the best place to start. Now, for places outside in the country where there aren't building permits, which there's a lot of that land, it's very useful. You can use this, for example, to not only build your house, you can build privacy walls. I have built aquaponics raft beds that contain the water out of Aircrete. It's also useful for solar greenhouses because it's insulating. You can make your north, your west, and your east walls out of this, and it doesn't break down in moisture like wood does, and it doesn't corrode and rot like aluminum does. And so it's a very good structure for uses in food production as well. You might even look into just using it for making nice decorative flower pots around the house. So, the uses are kind of up to your imagination, but it's definitely very practical in terms of a homesteading life or a preparedness life. Like if your house were damaged, and you could set one of these up very quickly, or perhaps you build one of these in advance, and you get that multiple function out of it. You function stack that so that it's your storage shed, it's your storm shelter. Or maybe later it becomes your plant starting area for your garden.
The concept of a storm shelter is very attractive in the South and Southwest, Southeast, because we do have tornado season, and it is no joke. And there's a lot of places where, kind of the in the ground tornado shelters just are not doable because we have a lot of rock in the state. Texas anyway, and up in people don't notice, like the state that the most people on average die in storms every year, tornadic storms, is Tennessee, which doesn't seem to make sense until you look at how long Tennessee is. People think of it as being small because north to south you blink you're through it, but tip to tip it's a huge state, and a lot of that country is granite, so dome structures are incredibly strong and incredibly storm resistant. So I think a storm shelter that also, like, it's not just a storm shelter. Like you said, it could be a storage facility, a guest house, what have you. And I think even in places where you can't have it be a house according to your safety inspector, Department of Making You Sad guy, it's just my shed, right? No one's prevented from going out and being in your shed, maybe even overnight, you know?
Exactly. And in California, which is one of the toughest states, because they don't allow cellular concrete, from my understanding, even with the commercial product because of potential earthquakes. Now, having said that, they actually tested one of these on a seismic machine, and the machine broke before they could shake it apart. But, yeah, so there's no official test results there. But, you know, whenever you look at the wind drag of a dome, you know, they've used that to put tornado measuring equipment inside of it because the air just physically can't get a hold of it and pick it up. Even a round structure, we were doing a wind load calculation on a 10-foot tall round structure, and with that coefficient of drag, you wind up with roughly 95 pounds of wind force at 185 miles an hour per square foot. And actually, that is well below what this material can handle. Now, it's a compressive strength structure, but it doesn't have the tensile strength. You know, in the same way they build bridges with rebar and cement or the foundations of your homes, you also need a tensile strength added to this. And with Aircrete building, that is a reinforcing roofing fabric. It's a commercial material that's already available, and it provides all the tensile strength. It's like a miniature rebar, if you will, but it's actually a fabric that is wrapped and bonded to the structure.
So does that mean, just so I understand the logistics here, we build the structure, and then we wrap the structure in this fabric, and then we put some kind of a layer over it? Is that what you're saying?
Well, after your bricks are stacked or your building is poured, you literally apply a coating of Aircrete mortar to the block surface. Then you apply your fabric, and then you work it through the fabric with a trowel, and then you put on a finish coat of cement, which is not Aircrete. It's actually a very hard material, and at that point it's finished. It can be painted, or if you would like, you could put in an acrylic stucco on it for a final finish.
Okay, that makes sense. So who would be capable of doing this? Like how much physical labor is it, you know, that type of thing? Because everybody says everything's easy until you go do it, including the people that are ramming tires with dirt.
Right, absolutely. You know, if you have an office job and you don't do anything, you know, it takes a little bit of time to get into shape. So the reality is that you can break this construction process up into manageable chunks. You know, you don't have to work it all day, every day. You know, in the example of the 24-foot house, maybe one day you come out and you break out the blocks and set up your mold back up, and then you come pour it another day. So you basically just manage it in chunks that you can manage. We had a 76-year-old man who has built his own home, and you know, he just moved at his own pace. And if you're somebody who can't climb a scaffold or a ladder, or you're not stable on your feet, it's also pretty easy to teach this process to unskilled labor. And as long as somebody that is knowledgeable is overseeing the process, you can get it done. So, you know, if you're financially limited and physically disabled, you can still get it done. You don't have to lift a 92-pound bag of cement. You know, what if you just pick it up 1 quart scoop at a time until you get it done? Yes, it takes longer, but you still can get it done. So really, I would say that a mental preparedness attitude is really the key ingredient in getting something like this done.
Got you. So we've talked about dome structures, and there's a lot of advantages there. Can you build other dwellings in other shapes? And how is that different if you do so?
Well, you can make blocks and stack them into a more conventional square structure if you like. You can use a pole barn style and use the Aircrete for infill. You can also build molds and literally just cast it like a monolithic pour in place. And you can build round structures. You can build square structures. I mean, it's a very artistic material, if you will. It can be shaped. If you wanted to, you could cast this stuff into a wall, and then you could scratch and etch it to appear as stone or brick, and then you could stain it, and, you could literally build something that looks just like a castle out of it.
That's pretty cool. And I've seen, like, on your site, I was looking around some of the different designs, like round structures, but they're not really a dome. They're more like a tower shape, a more conventional roof. I guess those generally would be, you build a form and pour it instead of make blocks?
Exactly. For the bug out location, it's actually, or hunting cabin, it's my preferred shape is the cylindrical structure. And the reason is you can get that cheap, 1/4-inch utility grade plywood for between $9 and $11 a sheet. And you just put it together, and because it's round, it supports itself very well. And you put this on top of your footing, and you just start pouring Aircrete, and literally within 2 weeks you can be ready to move in. It's actually cheaper to put on a more conventional roof on a structure like that, such as 2x12s that are insulated, but you can also finish that with a dome. And these round structures are incredibly fast to put up. So to me, that's the biggest advantage. They're affordable and quick to put up. It doesn't require you to make blocks and then mortar blocks and haul blocks and whatnot. So the round structures are actually my favorite because of how practical it is to set up, and because it's round, it's cylindrical. The air drag, even from a tornado, is really not going to grab hold of it.
Absolutely. So would you say that maybe there's people this isn't for, like this is probably not the right decision for them?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I would say if you have to be able to pull a permit and you're not willing to do the groundwork and get the engineer and the lab, and you just want to go pull a permit and set this up in your city, this isn't for you, because it takes a great deal of work to convince somebody who doesn't like to get outside of what they know to give you a variance, to give you a permit. Secondly, a bank is not going to finance this. So if you want to build a conventional house, you want to run down to the bank and get a loan for this, and just pay someone else to do it, that's just not going to get financed by a bank. And on the flip side of that, if you're going to flip your house or you expect to sell your house and just move away very quickly, again, you have the issue with you're going to have to owner finance it, because a bank is not going to knowingly finance a homemade Aircrete structure. If you can get no help and you're not going to be able to pay labor, and you can't climb a ladder, then certainly, I wouldn't encourage you to climb a ladder and do something you're uncomfortable doing. So those are the main groups of people. It's not conventional. It truly is alternative construction.
Gotcha. I think one of the gotchas there too then can be, so you put all this effort into a property, you build it. One thing we always have to think about is, what is our exit strategy?
Exactly.
If we want to sell it. So you can't finance it to build it, which means most likely no one else is going to be able to finance it to buy it, at least with the value of the structure. So somebody may be able to get land financing on that 20 acres you have, but you're going to have a hard time selling it to anybody that's not a cash buyer.
You are. Now, having said that, there are private individuals out there who, like investment bankers, can make their own personal decisions to finance. But no, you can't just run down to the bank and sell this and move away with the money in hand. However, given the price of building a structure like this, they really lending themselves to being more in the lines of tiny and small houses. It doesn't cost a lot to build one, and you probably could owner finance it, which makes you more money in the long term, but it does not give you the money to just run down to the next county or the next state and have the money and cash in hand to start over. Absolutely.
And that's not a reason not to do it. It's something to think about. And how much do I put into this if it's not my forever place, right? That's kind of where I'm going there. Because like when we moved here, we found this house, and just looking at the pictures alone, we're like, oh, we'll buy it. It was $260,000, and I looked at the kitchen and went, that's a $100,000 kitchen. I mean, this thing was just, and it was a geodesic dome.
Right.
It wasn't even non-typical construction. It was just round.
Right.
And we could not get financing on it. And the reason we couldn't get financing wasn't so much because the bank wouldn't do it. No appraiser would appraise it.
No.
It was just ridiculous because they couldn't pull a comp, is what they said.
Right. Yeah.
Now, the city of Mansfield had no problem saying it was worth more money and taxing accordingly. But, it was almost impossible to get financing for it.
Oh, of course. Yeah, that is the issue. It is out of the ordinary. Now, again, you could build it square, but what do you compare it to whenever you're going to assess a value for it? It would be something that would be more considered a garden shed, a storage shed, or something along those lines.
You do make a good point about it being better as a small house type thing. So kind of like my thing, like I've always said about tiny houses, if I was going to use tiny houses, no matter how you built them, is a compound approach, right? So you kind of build like your initial structure. And then there'd be a lot more room to cook if we had a kitchen. So we built kind of a kitchen structure. And then you build the kids, they're having kids now, and they'll build the kids a house. And then it would seem to me like with this type of material, you could kind of almost George Jetson it, like, where you could build another one next to it and then create kind of an archway to connect. You know what I'm saying? Kind of almost like thinking about like space pods or something.
Oh, absolutely. You can overlap the structures and you can literally take a wood blade and you can just cut the wall out. It's not like hard cement. It's easily workable. So you can literally create new doorways as you add on. Or yes, you could build an archway across the front to connect structures together. And if you like the Earthship type design, why not build an arch that connects all your structures in a line and make that an attached greenhouse?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's kind of talk about some other stuff that you have here. You have something here you call Spindle Apples.
Yes.
So you got to feed yourself once you have your place to live.
Yes.
So what are Spindle Apples?
Well, the tall spindle apple system is a system that's been developed by universities all over the country to bring a person into profit as quickly as possible. You literally start getting apples on the second year of production, and they're trimmed. They call them tall spindle because of the shape. It's basically a columnarized set of apple trees where you tie the limbs down so the hormones go out to the tips and it produces apples sooner. You cut them off to where they're only 3 foot wide. So in the same way you might see tomatoes in a greenhouse that look like they're almost all tomatoes and few leaves, these trees look like this. But at maturity, one tree is expected to produce 200 or more apples each year. And so you have the first advantage of getting production in the second year, in the neighborhood of 20 to 30 apples per tree, and then maturing into 200 apples per tree. It's a trellis system where you actually have to tie the trees up because you don't want them whipping in the wind and putting energy into building a thicker trunk. You want to get these trees to 10 foot in height by the end of the second year, because once they start setting fruit, they really don't grow much more after that. And so it's a high production apple system. Now, what really intrigues me about fruit trees as opposed to gardening is you plant them one time and they could potentially feed you for a lifetime. And actually, when you examine the human digestive system, it actually really is optimized for digesting fruit. Now, having said that, you have to mention that not everyone's microbiome is in the good enough shape to just go to eating fruit without having problems. So it's not always or never. But it is interesting that if you survive, and you remember the story of Johnny Appleseed,
Yeah.
those apples helped a lot of people survive. And so, as a survival food, there's really nothing that you can produce more food in a smaller space. You put these on a 10-foot trellis system and you space them 11 foot apart so that the sun can shine all the way to the bottom from the next row of trees. And if you examine that and you look at the number of calories that you have to have when you're digesting fruit, you can have one row of trees 40 foot long that can actually put you into a state of survival. And that's amazing when you consider 11 foot by 40 foot and you're surviving. And
what is the spacing on the trees themselves?
3 foot.
3 foot.
Yeah,
so
they have
every 12 feet you've got 4 trees.
Yes.
Okay.
And when you do this, I would encourage to buy metal tubing to hang wire on as your trellis. because we've had some issues with the modern treated timber. Even though they're 4x6s, they'll just break off at random, and the termites will eat them anyway.
Yeah, the termites don't eat steel. That's one of the good things about steel. This is kind of a cool thing. So you've been actually doing this? You've been growing them this way in Texas?
I have.
Have you found any particular varieties that do better than others?
Well, we're having some struggle with the apple rust because we're in East Texas, where at exactly the wrong time of year it starts raining and it stays wet and it stays humid for a long period of time. So, your mold, mildew, your spores of every pestilence you can imagine gets up into the trees. Now, I haven't found one variety particularly any better than another, except I will say this: Fuji apple, it tends to produce way too many branches and requires a bit more TLC to keep them in shape.
Okay. And are you using semi-dwarf, dwarf? What kind of rootstock?
Well, now they recommend a dwarfing rootstock, but after ordering apples from Cuffle Creek and talking to them, I actually tend to agree with them, and based on my experience, agree that not using a dwarfing stock is better because it's a much stronger, healthier tree that you don't, it takes less fertilizer and care and attention to keep that little tree healthy, whereas a dwarfing rootstock just doesn't reach out the way a regular rootstock does.
Yeah, well, you control this tree and any tree's form with pruning, and I've always thought controlling with the rootstock is probably not the best idea. And, I'm looking like University of Massachusetts is championing this method. Pretty cool pictures I'm looking at on images right now. There's a big difference between the soil in Massachusetts and the climate in Massachusetts growing an apple than Texas, whether it's your red clay or my black prairie. Like, it's a harsher environment here, and anything you can do to give that tree more resiliency just seems to make sense to me.
Oh, I agree completely because, in Texas anyway, in the north you have a dormant season when it's cold, but in Texas we have a dormant season when it's cold, but then we have a second dormant season. It gets so hot that basically the bacteria in the soil say, I'm done for a while, and the nutrients aren't in the soil. So with a dwarfing rootstock, the tree doesn't have the reach to really get out and grab that. And I can see the difference between my dwarf trees and my standard size trees. The standard size trees, they just go on. I don't fertilize them. I don't even generally water them, and they do fine.
This is really interesting. It's something I'm going to have to look more into, is developing a full system with it, because you talk about survival, and survival is about more than calories. And you mentioned Johnny Appleseed. This country ran on apples for the first half of our existence. What destroyed the apples in this country was Prohibition. People don't realize that. More people drank hard cider than beer before Prohibition. Beer was like, Prohibition's gone. And then you can commercially make alcohol now again, right? And okay, well, all the guys that ran the orchards were going broke, so they cut the trees down, so it's going to take us years to have apples again. I know, let's malt barley and make beer. And that's when we really became a beer-drinking country. Has a lot to do with the distilled alcohol as well. But you go back to that time, and it wasn't just hard cider. You had apples. Okay, so now you had juice, you had jelly, you had vinegar, you had cider, both hard and not hard. You had apple butter. Like, the apple was the foundation of the homestead. When people would get, their 40 acres and a mule or whatever, the first thing they would do is plant an apple orchard, generally from seed. And they would plant, full-size trees, just a buttload of them. And over time, they would be able to, okay, this is a good apple for making cider. This is a good apple for making vinegar. Now, if I can make cider and vinegar and I have eating apples, I've got so much of that survival component taken care of. I can sweeten with certain apples. I can use vinegar for curing, etc. And so the apple has this incredible array of things that it can do. So I'm kind of glad you threw that in there.
Yeah, the apple is really pretty miraculous. I don't want to sound like a snake oil salesman, but when you look at what you can do with an apple, when you talk about survival, you can get to a point of survival very, very quickly. And from that, you can add on the layers of luxury and the things that you want in your life to just live that better life. But honestly, whenever you've got a 50-gallon drum of apple cider set up, it's like having canned food. It creates this deep sense of accomplishment and security that it's really difficult to describe to somebody. But apples are something that work really well. And with the tall spindle system, we're talking about having apples the second year. If you go and buy these trees at the nursery where they're already 5/8 of an inch whip, and then you have to spray those with a hormone to make them branch more. The trees that I buy from the Crete nursery, because, they're only 3-4 inches tall, they have taken 3 years, but they have set apples this year.
Well, and that's more of a long-term, I think, concept when you're dealing with like Crete. And one of the things I learned from them, which would be very advantageous in a system like this, is staging your harvest. Early, mid, and late season apples so that you don't get everything at once. And I had them on the show years ago. I probably need to reach out to them again. That's a really cool idea. Let's move a little bit from there, though. So we've built this place, put our apples in, and you eat enough apples or anything, sooner or later you got to poop. So, let's talk about how do we handle waste with one of these off-grid cabins. What people typically do, at least to start out, like a human manure bucket toilet or something like that. Is there anything better out there than that approach?
Yes, I've done it all, and honestly, with certain first world expectations, I really don't want to deal with it, because no matter what you say, the human manure bucket, especially in Texas with our heat, it does stink. Yeah. You can try building a box and putting a fan in it, and if you ventilate enough air, you generally don't smell it, but then, people won't come over to visit you when they have to look down in there, right?
Yeah.
So, we have a system, we didn't develop it, we're just borrowing the best of the best from everywhere we can find it, a flushing worm composting system. You use a low flush toilet, and this is flushed into a container that can be made out of just brick, or you can pour it in place with regular cement, so it's something you don't have to necessarily buy a tank for. It's sizable. You can calculate how much of this you need, and what's amazing about it is you fill this container. You have a drain that comes off of the bottom, or you have a sewer grinder pump in the bottom to lift that liquid. So the liquid never stays in the composting chamber. And the amazing thing is, the more you use it, the less material that is actually in this container. And we find that twice a year you have to add back wood chips to this. The wood provides the carbon and processes out the nitrogen, and the nitrogen coming in helps it break down quicker. But the liquid itself just passes through and is sent into a 75 to 100 foot by 2.5 foot wood chip bed that's lined with a liner. And so far, we've never seen a discharge from a system, because you plant all sorts of water-hungry plants, maybe even a willow tree, in this growing area. And if you wanted to make a system like this legal, even, you could take the end of this system and then put it into a conventional septic system.
Okay. Interesting. Huh.
And there's an option. Texas A&M actually has a constructed wetlands set up and design that, of course, has gone through all the hoops and is approved, and they can't really argue with a system like that either. So there are alternatives, and honestly, you talk about living a better life. If I'm surviving, I want to survive well, and hauling buckets of poop around just
no.
isn't. Yeah,
I'm not doing it. I mean, I'll do it in an actual emergency situation if I have to. I'm not designing my life that, once every few days you have to pick up a 5-gallon bucket of poop and haul it somewhere. I just would like to believe that I am a better designer than that. So I'm going to find something better than that solution. You talk about survival mindset, and we talk around here, water, food, shelter, sanitation, security, and energy. What would you say is like a luxury survival item next to that?
Well, when you're surviving, if you're really surviving, you have the stress situations. They burn up extra vitamins in your diet, and you want something nice. So that luxury item is very unique for each individual. That's something you really got to examine for yourself. For some people, it might be a big supply of hot chocolate. For me, I really enjoy a nice hot tub as well as a cold dip right beside the hot tub. So I have my aquaponic systems, and I at this point will go float with the fish and watch shooting stars at night. So it's about your unique desire to plan that in, because truly you want to survive in a mentally well way. You don't want to feel like you're missing out on something. You don't want to be struggling with your internal thoughts because you're just like hiding from something, or you're just getting by. You want to build luxuries into your life, and that flush toilet might be one of them. Another one might be a recycling solar heated hot water shower where you can use 5 gallons of water and take a 3-hour bath for comfort. It's about designing these things into our life based upon what our personal and individual needs are, and of course starting all of this with the right attitude, that general human toughness that, hey, you know what, no matter what, I'm going to be all right. I can do this.
Got you, man. So if people want to take your courses, and I know you have on-site courses, people can come out, hang out, spend a couple days. You've got pre-defined dates on that. You even got things where people can say, hey, I want to come out and learn this and set their own date. And you've got online courses where people can basically get all the information in video. Where do people find all of that?
You can find all of that at our tinygiantlife.biz website. Sign up for the email list, because you'll be able to get a series of emails that basically take you from what is Aircrete to what are its advantages all the way to how do I build with it. So it's a way to get the information coming to you automatically. And I will say this, about 30% of the people who come and take a workshop, for example, they decide that Aircrete is not for them. And so, it's not necessarily wasted money to get a video course and find out what is actually going on, or to even attend a workshop. We do our daily workshops where you can schedule it on your time and just come out by the day if you'd like.
And you do have some preset ones coming up. You want to talk about maybe what dates are available there?
Yeah, we're going to be starting several of those. That's funny.
Caught you off guard. You don't know the dates of your own workshop.
You caught me off guard.
Don't worry, I've done it. I'm like, it's in May.
Well, the issue is that with these things, it seems like people always wait till the last minute to actually make any reservations. So it's kind of like you don't give it much thought until you're suddenly upon the deadline.
Well, here, I got them for you. I'm on your site.
I've got them.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, March 15th was sold out. We got May 31st, and that's going to be a continuing project. It's not from scratch. We're going to continue building a student project in Tyler, at the Tyler, Texas workshop, building a 24-foot one-bedroom dome. June 22nd will be more of the same. And then October 12th, we're going to build one of those rapid build cylindrical Aircrete cast houses as a bug out location / getaway vacation spot, and that's out near Terlingua, Texas, near the Big Bend National Park.
So that sounds like where you get lots of land for a little bit of money.
Yeah, they give it away out there because generally it costs more in taxes than the land is.
Anyway, man, again, the website is tinygiantlife.biz. Appreciate you being with us today, man, and hope you have a good day. Thanks for sharing this with us. I think it's going to help a lot of people.
Well, thank you, Jack. I really enjoyed it. I appreciate you.
Great interview, really interesting content, the kind of stuff I love, like how to take control of your life. I don't think this is for everybody. Daniel himself said it's not for everybody, but maybe it's for you. You want to learn more? Remember, his website is tinygiantlife.biz. Tinygiantlife.biz. Definitely worth checking out. With that, we've wrapped up another episode of the show. Hope you guys did enjoy it. Again, I did. If you want to help support this show, there's two main ways we can do this. One is you can become a member of my member support brigade. All I'll say about that today is you should do it because it'll save you more money than you spend. To learn more, go to thesurvivalpodcast.com and click on members. Support the show. Do that financially, but get your money back with discounts and make a profit every year. How much better can a program be than the MSP? I built it for that reason. The painless way, though, no direct money out of pocket, just do your online shopping at tspaz.com. You go to tspaz.com, tspaz.com, whenever you're going to shop online, do your online shopping through tspaz.com, and you help us no matter what you eventually buy. However, I do have items of the day for you that I review. We're kind of going through, if you've noticed, my fertility program, because we're in spring, everybody's planting gardens. So not every day, but every couple of days I'm bringing another one of the core 7 items of the fertility back around for you. Today is Hydro Organics Cal and Mag plant food. Calcium and magnesium are the number one thing that people have deficiencies in their gardens and have problems with their vegetables, and they can't figure it out. They dump more fertilizer, organic or conventional, whatever on there. They give it more water to the point where they overwater. They use compost and compost tea, use weed teas, etc. Here's the deal. Calcium and magnesium must be present in the right ratios and together and available at the same time for your plants to use either one. On top of this, if you live where you have specifically alkaline soils, it becomes difficult for the plants to get either one, but especially the calcium. So people will bury 4 or 5 eggshells when they plant a tomato and still wonder why they have blossom end rot. It's because you have a calcium deficiency. And I know it seems ridiculous that you have a hole full of calcium-containing eggshells and your plant can't get to them. If you had soil that was, 6.0, 6.2, you get all the calcium you need from those eggshells, assuming there's magnesium available. Okay? But when you have soil that's like 7.2, 7.4, 7.6, like many of you do, like I do, you're going to always have, with at least some of your plants, calcium deficiencies. My water is half calcium, and yet I have calcium deficiencies in some of my plants. Not with this stuff. Start with a soil drench, and then for the rest of the season, you use it as a foliar feed. It is very cost effective. It's $16 for a 16-ounce bottle. That makes 32 gallons of feed. And your plants literally only need a little spritz of it, every few weeks just to correct that imbalance. Check out my article on it. If you want to make your garden go and blow this year, use my fertility program. You can look at the review today. You can find a tag there that says fertility. It shows you everything in my program. I will guarantee you, if you use my fertility program the way I direct it, you will have outstanding results with your garden. You will not believe it. Check out all the products, but this is going to be the number one thing that people did everything else right, and they have these problems. In my article today, I even tell you what to look for, what the 2 deficiencies look like, how to know which one you're dealing with, and how to fix the problem for $16 for multiple. For most people, one $16 bottle of this stuff, even if you have a big garden, will take care of you for multiple seasons. It's not going to go bad on you. It's calcium and magnesium. It's billion-year-old elements. They're not going to go bad. So put it on the shelf, use it when you need it, and get rid of this problem with this deficiency in your garden. With that, we've come to the end of another show, and we have our song of the day. We're in Spiritual Week this week, and John Adam had a rare time where he presented a song to me that I just I'm not doing it. The song he had for you guys today was Creeping Death by Metallica. And I went through my Metallica phase, right? I had my jacked up Grand Prix, which, by the way, became known as Creeping Death. The car itself became known as Creeping Death. And I had my Radio Shack stereo head and amplifier and 6x9s in it. And I used to drive around like an idiot blasting music everywhere. Metallica got on there. But this is supposed to be Spiritual Week. And Creeping Death from Metallica is about the plague in Egypt and the death of the firstborn of the Egyptians, and there's die, and it's got this blaring music, and I went, you know what, that's not my spirituality. That's not my spirituality. And it's so divorced from it, and so divorced from the subject we were talking about today, which is so empowering, that I called an audible, as I say, and I picked my own song for today. And on the surface, it may not even seem like a spiritual song. The song is World, and it's by Five for Fighting, which I love Five for Fighting. And this song is about creating the world that you want. One of the most important lines in it is, history starts now. In other words, what you do today is the history of tomorrow. And when I look at things from a spiritual viewpoint, and I have similarities and differences with many of you that listen to this show, But when I think about spirituality, I think about the glory and the beauty that is creation itself. For those that don't know, I am not a follower of any organized religion. I call myself a deist. I believe there is a God, a first cause, a creative force that I do not understand, but I can know through the creation. But the thing that I'm most grateful for in my life and in the lives of everybody around me is that at this point in time, if we understand that history starts now, at least the new history starts now, and we realize how much we know and how much we can do and how much we can change things, we can change the face of this planet. Someday humans may change the face of other planets in the solar system or beyond. We are co-creators. We are part of the creation itself. We can change the face of the planet as a species, for better or for worse. But what each of us can do, and what this song is about, is there's something we can touch and something that we can change. With permaculture, we can change the face of the planet in the tiny little postage stamp that is our own backyard. As fellow human beings on this planet, we can change the face of our friends and our family from happy to sad, or from sad to happy, depending on what we do. We can, in our lives, create discord, or we can create joy. We have the power today to change tomorrow by our choices and by our actions, for better or for worse. History starts now. What are you going to do with it? With that, it's been Jack Spirko with another edition of the Survival Podcast, helping you figure out how to live that better life if times get tough.